Hi, this is Jeff Mosby with Grey Ghost Graphics with the next edition of Tips and Tricks. And today we're kind of going to run around the shop a little bit, and I'm going to show you half a dozen or so tips and tricks that I've found useful over the years. And I hope you enjoy them. And here we go. Thank you. Okay, this tip involves putting a round end on a strap. And if you don't have an end punch, which most of us, let's face it, don't, because that's kind of a luxury to have all the sizes you might ever need, this is a way to do any size. And this is a 6 to 7 ounce leather, so it's fairly thick. So the thing I found that is most useful for doing this is an Olfa rotary cutter. And I first became aware of these from watching quilters and how they cut fabric. And these things are razor sharp. They work really well. And what you do is, I've got a scribe line on the end of this strap, and I want to follow that line with the rotary cutter. So what I do is, I have this cutting table is covered with these rotary cutter self-healing mats, and they work really well because the cutters will work perfectly with these mats. They don't dig in, and they don't create a groove that your cutter's going to follow later when you're trying to cut a straight line. So anyway, what you want to do is lay the cutter so it's parallel to the edge, and then just start working in, but turn the leather, not the cutter, and just follow that line all the way around. And I'm just turning the leather, and I'm just kind of wiggling the cutter, so it's barely moving forward, but the leather is rotating all the way around. And then when you get to the end, make sure your fingers are well out of the path of the blade, and then there you are. You have a perfectly cut round strap end. My next tip involves round punches, slot punches, etc. One of the problems you can have with these is every time you punch a hole, it can get stuck in the leather, and then you have to stop what you're doing, pull it out, get ready for the next one, do it, stop, pull it out. It triples the amount of time it takes to punch a succession of holes. So, to show you the problem, here's one of the few punches I have not polished, and that's this little trick, is polishing the cutter end. And see, now it's stuck in the leather. I've got to pull it out and then move to the next one. Here's one that's been polished. Okay, just pops right out. So I can just keep riding along. And the way you can do this is, if you have a buffing wheel that's intended for metal, don't use this on buffing wheels that you're going to buff lacquer or anything like that. It should be a dedicated metal buffing wheel. You can take your punches to it and put a high polish on them, and that's going to eliminate the problem of the punch sticking in the leather. And that's the second tip. Thank you. Okay, here's a problem that I've encountered from time to time, is when I'm sewing up to a right angle corner. And if I turn the leather piece at this point to a right angle and then continue sewing, about 50% of the time it'll skip that corner stitch. And I've had that happen so many times, and of course if I try it now it won't do it. But the way I've found to fix that is to, by hand, raise the needle about 50% or a little more, so not out of the leather but just up. And what that does is the hook catches the thread, so when you turn the right angle corner, you sew along. And we'll do it again. I'll lift it up just a little bit, turn the corner, to go. And the result is a nicely stitched corner with no skipped stitches. Okay, this next tip involves the use of a set of tools that I discovered through my pearl inlay work, and these are called beading tools, and they're used in gun engraving for putting stippled backgrounds on pictorial gun engraving. But they also reminded me of extremely tiny cedar tools, which are, I'll find a plain one. Something like that. That's got the little serrations on the edge, but that's a cedar. I do have plain ones. Let's see. Here's a plain one. Okay, and basically, what I like to use these for is, say I have a flower center that's got the little seeds. Get that, and that looks great by itself. That's a great flower center. Now I'm ready to put these to work on this flower center. But really highly detailed work like this, these glasses, while they're great for some things, aren't going to cut it here. Especially, I'm in the blind as a bat category when it comes to seeing up close these days. And I have this wonderful magnifier light headband made by QED of Lexington, Kentucky. Ira Cooper sells these, and they're indispensable for this kind of work. And Lisa, what do you do with them?
Well, they're also extremely beneficial for when you're doing background dyeing on intricate patterns. You can definitely get in nice and close and see where your flow is going. So I couldn't do the work without those.
Thank you. Okay, so what I want to do, and I'll have Lisa come in and get a real close-up here, is you can see how small those seeds are, okay? And then I can take and find a size that would fit inside that. And maybe let's take that one. And this little graver handle comes with it. You can use it without it. I did for a long time. You can just, because it doesn't really require a lot of pressure. But if you can put it in the handle and then use your finger to steady it if you need to, but just come in on the center of that seed and very lightly put a little dimple. And I find if you turn it, it gets a little burnish. And one of the things I like in leather carving is when you just discover little details. The longer you look at a piece, you see more and more little things that you didn't see before. It's like watching a good movie. You know, every time you watch it, you see something you missed. And so that's what I do with these.
See if we can get a close-up of that, Jeff. Wow.
And these will stand up with antique. You know, you won't lose that detail because these make a really defined circle. And it's domed, just like the flower center seed is, so it matches. Another area where these are really useful, and I'll put a picture of this in the video, is say you have a bird and it's got an eye. This will put a pupil in the eye. And I have a John Denver replica strap that I do an eagle, and there's a whale, and but I can actually get a pupil in the eye, and the eye is no bigger than these seeds. So anyway, I'll put the model number, the stock number for this kit. They're not expensive. I think they're under $15, but they're really a nice addition to your bench. If you do really detailed work, or you want to add more depth and detail to your figure carving and floral carving. Thank you. Next tip involves a subject that most people have a solution to, but they may not have this one. There's many ways to back your project before you carve it. The reason you do that is to eliminate stretch, and you also get greater depth because the leather, when you stamp it, can't expand outward, so it has to go upward. And you can use rubber cement on poster board, which is fine. It tends to leave rubber cement all over the back of your project. So if you're lining it, not a big deal. If you're not lining it, then you have all this rubber cement in the back of your project. And every method has its pluses and minuses. The one that I found that has the least minuses for me is shelf paper. And it's cheap, and you can get it at Walmart, you can get it at Lowe's, Home Depot. This one I've cut down. Usually they're about this long, but I took it on a bandsaw and I cut, because I do mainly guitar straps and they're 3 inches wide typically. I cut this piece of shelf paper that's about 3.5 inches wide, might be 4 inches, but anyway, it's just slightly wider than my strap that I'm going to cut. So what I do is I just and this white stuff I found works better than the clear stuff because it doesn't leave a residue on the back. I don't know, this is just something I found out by accident. But basically I want to cut it out so that it's slightly longer than my project. And then I peel off the backing, which can take a second to get a hold of. And we'll come back when I get the backing peeled off. Okay. Peel the backing off, and then what I do is I lay this down. And if it's a long strap, what I've found is sometimes I'll take clamps or something or tape it to the bench to get the bubbles out of the shelf paper. And what I'll do is I'll lay it down here, and then I'll bend it back, and then I'll just roll it and let it kind of roll down and flatten it as I go. Okay? And then, now that's fine, but that's not going to set it. So what I like to use to set it is this glass slicker. Okay? Glass slickers are great for if you want a really smooth finish on a plain piece of leather that you're carving, but there's going to be plain areas. This works fantastic because what it does is it takes all that leather and makes it glassy smooth, and you can still carve it, but the plain areas will have this beautiful smooth finish. Another thing it does is it helps remove stretch. You can pre-stretch your leather. You can work from the middle, work it out, and it'll pre-stretch your leather so when the leather dries, you're not going to get as much distortion. What I like to use the glass slicker for is I turn it over, and starting from the center, I use this to really set that shelf paper. I pay particularly close attention to the edges. And when I get to the end, I turn the slicker at an angle so it doesn't drop off the edge and slam into the bench. So I'll turn it at an angle, and that way I get all the corners and everything without accidentally running off the edge. And then I flip it around and do the same thing. And then that really sets it. And then what I can do is I can take this over to my cutting table, and using my rotary cutter, I can trim away all the excess. The nicest part is when you're done carving your project, you just come back and peel that off. And there's no sticky residue. It pulls up the grain just a little bit, or the flesh side just a little bit, so that'll give some good tooth for the glue. And if you are going to line it, that's great. If you're not going to line it, then you can just slick it back down. Anyway, Walmart shelf paper works fantastic. And that's that tip. Okay, this tip involves conchos. And sometimes when I make guitar straps for a customer, they want a series of conchos on it. One issue I run into is if it happens to be a concho right where it crosses the peak of the shoulder, if I use a screw back to secure it, sometimes they would be able to feel it, particularly if they didn't want the sheepskin shoulder pad on it. So just the lining leather alone would not keep the customer from feeling that bump of the screwback Concho. So I thought, how can I fix this? Well, the way I found is these medium rapid rivets work really well. When you set them, they're really flat. You can also use the finish rivets because they flatten out pretty nicely, but these in particular flatten out really well. And it'll fit within the Concho. And then what I do is I take it over to my press and I press that down, and as the metal expands, it bites into the threads, and now you have a riveted Concho that will not come loose. And I'll take it over to the press and I'll show you how that works. So join me over there next. Okay, here we are at my press, and this is one of the old Tandy, what they call a 3D imprinting machine. And it was really used for the big letter stamps and the 3D stamps. And what I have is I have a well-worn piece of leather that I use to protect the finished side of the Concho from the platen of the press. And so I set that down, and I have a ram foot here that's been put in here, and that's just flat on the bottom. And what I'm going to do is I've got this set at the proper height, so when I bring this down, I'm going to press that in, and I'm going to put that just a little harder. I'm going to turn that. And that sets it in there. Does a really nice job. And you can apply as much pressure as you think you need to do the job. But the Concho is set. It's not coming off. And it lays nice and flat. And that's it. Well, thank you for joining me on this tips and tricks video. I hope you found them useful, and we'll see you on the next one. Thank you very much. Have a great day.